This is the last part of the class tonight. Oh, let me go back here a couple. Okay. I'm going to go in this, so don't try and write all this down. So I'm just going to give you, don't try to write all this down. I'm just going to give you the 5 periods, and then I'll go over this in more detail next week because we'll get into it. But this first period is the father's period, the patriarchal period. This is like 2000 to 875 BC. This is the Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob period of time. So that's covered the first 12 chapters of Genesis. And then there's this part where God is the ruler, God is the king. From Exodus to Ruth, the nation's ruled by God. They don't have any earthly king at all. So that's this period of time. 14, you see the space, the 430-year gap when they are enslaved. Then you see this 400-year period where they are ruled by priests or judges, heroes as they're called. And then in 1043 they have their first king. So that's the monarch period. So, and this is covered, you see the breakdown of how it's covered. This is about 500 years, 450 years for that monarch period. And then the next part, they go into exile for 70 years. The exile period, they're out of the land for 70 years, and then they come back to the land, and then they're there for another 100 years. They're there longer, but then there's the restoration period. So there you see 49,697. The Bible is a book of very great detail, and you can calculate exactly how many people come back to Israel when they come out of the captivity, the exile that they were in Babylon. So Babylon is like in southern Iraq on the Gulf, in the Persian Gulf area. That's where the headquarters of Babylon was, and thousands of the people of Israel were taken captive into that territory. And so there was no capital city of Israel. Israel didn't have its own land for 70 years. And then they still haven't, it's not until 1948 that they really became a governmental entity in their own right again. So from 536 BC, from 605 BC, that exile, there was like 3 phases of this exile, but they finally became like, they finally weren't in control of their own territory anymore. And so that from that 605 BC period till 1948, what's that, 2,500 years, Israel did not have a political entity. So that's just a little history lesson for you. Ezra came with 2,000 others, and then in 445, Nehemiah reconstructed the city, and Jerusalem became sort of a functioning entity again as a center. So now we'll start with Joshua tonight. And this is the theme of the book is possessing the nation. And here's some comparison of the 2 people. The first, Moses, and then Joshua, their different roles. Moses led Israel out of bondage, but Joshua took them into blessing, took the nation into the blessing. Moses brought them through the Red Sea. Joshua is going to take them through the Jordan. And Moses was the symbol of deliverance out of their captivity, out of their slavery. And Joshua represents the symbol or the emblem of victory for Israel. So these 2 men, so it's kind of interesting. There's a verse in there that says that Joshua did a lot of things for Moses, including washing his clothes. So, that's, you wonder, how did he become a great leader? I don't know. I guess wash clothes, maybe wash somebody's car today or something. But that's how Joshua was just pretty much, and God laid his hands, Moses laid his hands on Joshua. Joshua became the leader. And Joshua's words were at the beginning of Joshua, after the death of Moses, the Lord spoke to Joshua. So the speaking still comes, the Moses assistant. So God is still being heard, by a man under authority. So Moses and Joshua were people who heard from God. Moses saw God in a different way, but Joshua is hearing from God, so the voice is still there. There's still communication with the leader of the nation. Now, this historic purpose, it just shows us how God fulfilled the promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is the thread. This is the thread. This is the conclusion of one part of Israel's story. You know, the first promise to Abraham is now, you know, your nation. Abraham got a lot of this information from God. What's going to happen, that they would be in captivity, that they would be enslaved, and then they're going to come. So the historic landmark here is that this is the place. Abraham's promise. Abraham believed God and he went. There was a trust. He trusted God, he went. And now Israel is the nation of Israel with its millions is the answer to that historic promise. So the faithfulness to God's promise is the doctrinal purpose, like it manifests. So if you're looking for a doctrinal underline or a doctrinal bottom line, it manifests God's faithfulness to his promises. So let's go back a little bit to this thing that I had here. 1875 BC, this is where these promises are made. And now you go all the way through, and now we're 600 years later, we're getting to the arrival of the people of Abraham in the territory. Then the Christ-centered purpose, this is Joshua means this, Yahweh saves, or Yahweh is the Savior. And in Joshua 5:14, it shows there is an appearance, what they call in the Old Testament a Christophany, an appearance of the commander of the Lord of hosts, who is Jesus Christ. And he has his sword pointed. He has his sword out and he's ready for war. The Lord is ready for war. He's ready for war. And the nations that are in the territory now are destined for death. You know, I'm talking about now, but the territory that Israel's, they're destined for death. And that's like maybe a confusing thing for some people to grasp. Like, why God made these people? Like, why is there an issue with them? And it goes really back to the whole premise of shedding innocent blood and committing gross immorality. These kind of things. God, at a certain point, in Revelation, how many have read the book of Revelation? Everyone? Everyone, I'm not looking up. If you haven't, please read it at some point in your life. But in the book of Revelation, there are bowls, or it's in the King James it calls vials, but it's really bowls. They're bowls, and maybe they're huge, yeah?
Does it say somewhere in Revelation that if you read the book of Revelation, you get something special in heaven?
If you read the book of Revelation, you get something special.
My grandmother always used to tell me that, and I was just checking it.
I've never, obviously if that verse is in there, it hasn't registered like totally with me. But if you read the book of Revelation, you get a special insight on how all hell is going to break loose. And then how, you know, and why. I think it's, you know, these nations that are in the land that Israel is going to possess, and the nations that are controlling the world at the time of Revelation, they are of the same spirit. The anti-God, antichrist spirit is one and the same in them. And at a certain point, the bowls of Revelation become full, and then they must be tipped over. It's like the wrath of God, the mercy of God, the mercy of God. Like people say, do those bowls like draw down sometimes? I don't know. Like okay, it's like a nation is like really like godly for like 60 years, and then all of a sudden it goes, there is no wrath, and I can't explain that. All I know is in Revelation we see that the bowls are full, and then the wrath of God is spilled. And like the bowl is full on these nations. God has allowed these nations to live and to do some of the things that they've been doing for decades, years, and now here comes Israel. And Israel is promised this land, and it's given severe instructions on how to treat the inhabitants of the land. Not nice. This is the wrath of God, It's not revenge, it's the wrath of God. It's the consequence for disobedience. It's the consequence for shedding innocent blood, and we'll get to this in a couple of minutes. Okay, so the outline of Joshua could break down this way. You got chapters 1 to 5. There's an entering. It describes that in great detail, the entering of the land, how it happens. There's the conquering of the land, and then the possessing of the land. So there is a entering in, a defeat of the major armies, major rulers, and then there is like the possessing of the land. Not all the people are driven out of the land right away. Now, there is a verse in the instructions that Moses gave, that if a city determines to make peace with you and comes out to make peace, then you are to give peace, okay? So that's one understanding that you should understand about that. I can't remember exactly where that verse is, but there is a instruction that Israel, if a city comes out to make peace, then you don't destroy the city. You take the city over. There's certain things, but God knew this wasn't going to happen, so he told them to annihilate these things. Every city fought Israel. Every city that was wiped out fought Israel, and Israel annihilated the people. So the first chapters, this talk about the entering. This is God preparing the people. He's encouraging the people. He's enabling them. He's wanting them to be strong. This is the first thing. Where is it? Verse 7 or verse 6 in the first chapter. Be strong and of good courage, for this people God will divide the land. To this people God will divide the land. Only be strong and very courageous, that you may observe to do according to the law of Moses, and that you may prosper. And it says, this book of the law shall not depart out of your mouth, but you shall meditate in it day and night, that you may observe to do it according to all that's written therein. Then you will have good success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and be of good courage, verse 9. Be not dismayed, for your God, the Lord your God, is with you wherever you go. He'll never leave you. That's a promise there. This is the preparation. Inward preparation, and then there's an outward preparation in these three parts of the land. Now, Joshua will send 2 spies into the land again. And, those spies will scout out the land, and then Rahab will hide them on the roof of her house, and she will become a part of Israel too. And that's a good story there, those spies. Remember the last time Israel sent spies, it didn't go so well. They came back with an evil report. So there's a preparation. The people are preparing for what they're going to do. There's a passage. The river Jordan will dry up. And how will it dry up? The priests will be going before them, leading the people. They'll have the ark of God on their shoulders. When they get into the waters part. And then Israel goes over on dry land. And then there's a purification. Again, they renew this circumcision, the rite of circumcision, as it was given to Abraham. All the boys are circumcised, and then they recover, and then they're prepared for the war. And just to show themselves, again, why did God institute this? He just says, this is a mark. This is a mark on your life. This is a decision you take. This is a mark on your life that shows that you are different from the other peoples. And it's not seen, it's not out there for everyone to see, but it is something that I am telling you to do in obedience to me. And so we wonder about this. Again, it's one of those things that God has said, do this and live, or don't do this. And it was just it was a sign of identification, a sign of obedience to God. Do something like this. It's not like the most pleasant thing to do, and it's but they did it. And now they're ready to go into the territory. Right there you see the priests carrying that, kind of look like the Beatles. Sorry, I should have picked a better sort of picture. The long-haired kind of guys there. I'm not sure who they are. Interesting carrying. Well, they don't look like the Hasidic guys with the beards. They don't have beards on. These are young priests. These are the priests in training. But they're carrying the Ark of the Covenant across. When they get into the water, when they step in, the priests go first. Again, what did the priests have to be first about before? Who remembers? Pardon? Yeah? Yeah? Yeah, that's true. But they dealt with sick people, right? The lepers, right? Who'd the priests have to go? Now the priests are like, when you put your ankles in the water, it's going to part, So, just saying, the priests had a special place in Israel, but also had several special things to do. And, touching lepers was one thing, and also going into the river first was another. So they went into the river, and then the waters piled up there. So, so in the next, the 5 chapters, we have these things. In the next, from 5 to 12, you get the victory, the revelation of the victory. Jesus visits. Moses recognizes him. Joshua recognizes him. And there's a revelation of what's coming. God is telling him, you are going to win. That's the first thing. The first thing is you get the information you're going to win. And the second thing, there's no sin in the camp. There's a realization of victory, how it happens, by obedience. And then they see the revelation of defeat, the realization of defeat when there's somebody who doesn't act the way that you're supposed to. There's a covetousness there. Achan covets something. And then there's a record of victory. 31 kings conquered over a 7-year period. 1 king for every day of the month. I've heard messages on that, like God gave you 1 king for every day of the month. 31 kings conquered. You can live in victory every day of the month. 31 kings. Just claim the promise of Joshua. Oops, sorry. Where'd I go? There you go. Revelation of the victory, realization, and a record. So you're told about it, you experience it, and then you write it down. That's pretty much what God told Israel to be. That's why we have the Bible. God tells you things, you experience it, and then those who experience it write it down for those who come later to hear about it, to realize it, and then write it down. Or write books about it. Like, we're not writing scripture anymore. But, that's the Bible is pretty much, that's the way it goes. This is the way it is. This is what's coming. And then when it comes, you experience. So you get that sort of pattern throughout the Bible. The revelation, the realization, and then the record. Like, okay, write this down so that the people coming next won't do it. And then the thing is that we keep having the revelation and the realization and then the record, but the people after who don't read the record, so you have to have another thing that happens. So it's like this vicious circle. Judges is like just a tragic kind of thing. If you've ever read the book of Judges, don't raise your hand, but you should read the book of Judges. That would be good. But there's so many cycles of didn't they realize that should be like that? Like, wow, how, but it's just, again, it's like the microcosm of human nature. That's the way it is. We're told something, and then we experience it, and then it's written down, but we don't read what's written down. We just have to be told something again, realize it, and then write it down ourselves. People coming after us, anyway. So there we see Jericho falls. Joshua fit the battle of Jericho, and the walls came a-tumbling down. And that's a true story. Archaeological discoveries have shown that something happened at this site and pushed something down into the ground. So the walls, how the walls came down, did they go down sort of like an elevator, like that? We're not sure. But we know that the walls came tumbling down and the Israelites marched in. How many times did they march around the wall? Are you sure? It's a trick question. 13. Excellent. 6 times once, 7 times on the last day, then they blow the trumpets. The priests carrying the ark, trumpets going before, the ark of God being in the midst of the soldiers, the center of the army, marching around. And the thing that's kind of interesting is, this is the thing that's interesting. How long has Israel been in the desert? How long? How long have they been in the wilderness? 40 years. Okay. 40 years. When the spies go in and the harlot takes them in, She says, all of our hearts have melted because we heard, what did they hear? We heard about the Red Sea and how you swallowed up. That was 40 years before. For 40 years, they've been telling the stories in Canaan about this huge amount of people that's marching slowly, and then they're going in another circle. It's like it's probably here they come, oh, there they go, there they go, there they go, there they go. Israel's coming, oh, another, So how many times did the lookout at Jericho look out and see this mass of people coming, the cloud of God, and it's coming, and they see them going out every morning and picking up manna. This is a strange group of people, and they're coming for our land. And they saw it and they knew it, and she said, our hearts are melted. Our hearts have melted because we've been waiting for you to come. Just get this over with. And, but the idea of the message of God going before the people of God and penetrating a people who supposedly had not heard. Like, that's a big question. Well, what about like this and this group of people and they've never heard God? Is God going to really send them to hell and everything? I'm just saying that the Bible tells us that all flesh shall see the salvation of the Lord. That's a promise in the Gospel of Luke. It's a reality. These people heard about the God of Israel. They knew He was powerful. And a prostitute knew enough to save herself and the family. Now, you're not looking at like the king's palace didn't come down and those members didn't get the message, but the prostitute got the message. Like the common people hear him gladly. And you could say that a prostitute is probably a little bit lower on the common status. She's about as common can be. That's it. But she's saying, well, I got one chance in this life, and if I blow, what's the use? They're either going to kill me or I can change everything. And so she believes this. So, all right. So the next part of the after that is the possessing of the land. They distribute it. There's a dispute about the altar, and then there's a discourse and the death. This is like we're just going through Joshua really fast here. And all the tribes of Israel would maintain a central place of worship. They would set up this place in Shiloh, and there's a distribution of the land. From 13 to 21, they would cast, the land was divided up. We'll see a picture in a second. The land was divided up for the tribes, and the tribes would be given this space in the territory, each tribe its own space, and they were told to go in there. After they conquered the land as a whole, like destroying all the major cities, defeating 31 kings, now the land is theirs in this sense, governmentally. They have total control. All the people are not out of it yet, though. They have not started to deal with all the people in the different pockets of the land. And you get this phrase that comes up again and again in Joshua, like, and they had this, but they did not drive out the inhabitants. And Asher had this part of territory, but they did not drive out the inhabitants. And so God said, this is your place, claim it. But the people of Israel did not really claim it. They did not really claim the territory the way that they were supposed to claim the territory. Judah did, in pretty much, and that's pretty much why Judah survived for a while, because they really did that. Bless you. They really did that. And then we have a discourse of Joshua at the end, and then the death of Joshua. So we'll get in a little bit more detail. Now, so here's the sort of territory. This is the. I don't have to go over there. Okay, this is the Jordan River here. This Moabite territory, the Amorites, they will war against Israel and be defeated. The Moabites, they hired what prophet? Balaam. So they're defeated. And then this territory. And over here you see like a couple of tribes. 2.5 tribes decide they don't want to go over here. They've got like a lot of livestock, and they would really like to be here. This is like this place looks really nice to us. We would really like to be in this territory. And they come to Moses, so they don't go over the river. They don't go through the river into this territory. Now their soldiers did. All of their wives and kids stayed over here, but Gad, Reuben, and this this half tribe of Manasseh, they did send their fighting men over to help defeat all the kings. And so you can see how some of these tribes got this little space here. Benjamin gets this little space. They're the smallest tribe. Asher gets this territory up here on the coast. They're the beach, that's the Ocean City people there. Naphtali gets this. This is the Sea of Galilee. Jesus will grow up here in Nazareth, up in Naphtali. Zebulun, Naphtali, Zebulun. There's a prophecy concerning about that. Issachar will have this little place. I mean, there's natural boundaries here. You're like going, how did they divide that up? It looks like a politically obtuse congressional map. There you go. Politically obtuse. I'm trying to be careful there. But you're like, how did Simeon get this? Like, here's Judah. They surrounded everything, and Simeon goes right in the middle of it. And then this little territory goes here. And Benjamin actually had possession of Jerusalem, but they couldn't defeat the Jebusites. So then it fell to Judah to do it. And then David finally drove out the Jebusites decades later. So all of these borders, this was they're going to cast lots for this and divide the land up. Every tribe will have its territory here. But again, in the book, as we read it, we see that there are pockets of these old groups of people living in these territories. And so they have to drive them out. This piece, like I was showing Garvey, this piece here, right here, is still the Gaza Strip, which is controlled by the Palestinian Authority of the Middle East. The Palestinian Arabs there, they live on this land. They have pieces of territory over here that they control called the West Bank, but the Philistines right here. So, it's a good question. Like, are the Palestinians direct descendants of the Philistines? I mean, probably a good number of them. They claim to have been living in this land, but this piece of Gaza there, Ashdod, and the fish head, the body of a fish and a head of a man, that's their god, the Philistines. And Goliath was a Philistine and an enemy of Israel. So, okay. All right, so we have some issues that are raised in Joshua that maybe you have heard about. There's this long day. There's this big battle that happens in Joshua chapter 10, and Joshua tells the moon and the sun to stand still. And so there is this, this battle that came in. A group of people came in and deceived Israel into making a treaty with them. And so there had to be this war that was fought. This group of people came down, and so Joshua wanted the battle over in one day. He wanted to get this done. And so there is this scientific problem of this long day. So these are issues that maybe you hear people like, what about, did this really happen? Well, the ancient Chinese, there's some writings about this day that was longer. The Incas in Peru and the Aztecs of Mexico have a similar record. People have found it. The Babylonians and the Persian writings tell of this same day. And Herodotus, who was the father of historians, he was like the first historian around 500 BC in Greece, Athens, 500 to 450 BC. Herodotus went to Egypt, and he was shown records of this strange day that was twice its natural length. So we have what they call anecdotal evidence that this happened. Now, there is this famous story. I will tell you this. There was a man named Harold Hill. He's from Baltimore. He worked for this Curtis Engineering Company that's still around. He was like the first original Biggest Loser. Lost like hundreds of pounds and wrote a book based on how Jesus helped him do it called How to Flip Your Flab Forever. And then he wrote a second book called How to Be a King's Kid. Harold Hill was his name, How to Flip Your Flab. And he tells this story. He tells this story in How to Be a King's Kid. It was like I saw him speak once. He was hilarious. He was like but he tells this story about, he worked for NASA. He was an engineer. and he tells this story about how they were trying to compute orbits back as far back as they could, and they kept getting to a point where they couldn't get the orbit, like they couldn't, whatever the computer wasn't satisfying the calculation properly. And so someone in the group suggested that they plug in this long day and see if that like helps the equation. And apparently it did. But it was still not right. And then there was the other day in Isaiah, Hezekiah asked for the sundial to go back 40 minutes, and it did. And when they put these, Harold Hill tells this story that at NASA, this computer happened. Like, it's not documented, and NASA doesn't know if it really happened or if it ever happened, but Harold Hill told this story, and it's out there. And but he claims that, like, when they calculating these orbits, that they weren't getting the right calculation. They kept coming up short. And when they plugged in this long day, then everything sort of fell in place. So that's just one thing that's sort of interesting out there. How to Flip Your Flab Forever, if you really want to read like the original Biggest Loser book, you can find it there. It's kind of, I didn't read it because I've never really been flabby. So, I mean, actually, that's not true. That's not true. I was at one more flabby than I am today. Anyway, I should move on, right? Joshua's long day. There we go. And that's a nice picture of that. Now, the other issue, the moral problem that we talked about, the slaughter of the Canaanites. Israel was commanded by God to exterminate men, women, and children. What's the problem with that? Well, with our day and age, it's like, it sounds like, what does it sound like? It sounds like genocide. Yeah, genocide. I mean, it is a situation. I mean, you heard last night in the message maybe a little bit about the nuclear bomb and why he did it. I mean, before Islam, well, Islam's been around for a while, but before the rise of radical world domination kind of Islam that we hear about from Iran these days, there was Shintoism, and that was like the warrior class of the Japanese. It is a religion, and it was basically honor. We never, 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 never surrender. There was there was a war for a tiny little island. It's either Okinawa or Iwo Jima. The Japanese had 30,000 troops on that. The United States invaded with 100,000, I believe it was, or might have been 50,000, but 60,000. The Japanese, at the end of the days of fighting, there was only a handful, like 20 Japanese surrendered. All the other ones just fought to the death. And so, what's saying? Yes?
They were even taught to, like, jump off cliffs and just commit suicide.
Yeah, so... No. Okay. Well, that's... Yeah. Well, so that's the kind of thing. So the practices of human sacrifice and base immorality are the two reasons, okay? The land, it says in Leviticus, will vomit out its inhabitants. Now again, there is the verse that says, if a city comes out to declare peace to you, you are to receive them and to make them your servants forever. This happened to one group of people called the Gibeonites. They deceived Israel, and Joshua and the leaders did not seek God for counsel, and so this group of people survived, and they became a snare to Israel. Iniquity was full, divine judgment fell. The best thing that I can say about this is it's like surgery for cancer. I mean, we can talk a lot about, like, the United States dropping 2 atomic bombs, and like it's still like considered like one of the most dastardly deeds on the planet. But if you've ever read Unbroken, you can read Unbroken and then come back and tell me what you think about that again. Read the book Unbroken. It's a Christian story about a guy who survives months on a life raft, years in a prison camp, gets saved at a Billy Graham crusade, and it talks about how he finds forgiveness for the people who mistreated him in Japan. But it's a great story. It's one of the best books. I read that book this summer, so you can read it. It's a great story, true story. But this moral problem, Yahweh is at war with sin. Now, He's the Lord, strong and mighty. The Lord is mighty in battle. That's Psalm 24. And every abomination to the Lord which He hates, they have done to their gods. Even their sons and daughters have they burnt in the fire to their gods. Deuteronomy 12:31. This is the instruction. Why? Now you're going to see a picture in a second. It's not a very gross picture, but I want to give you the background of it in a second. But Yahweh is at war with sin. These people had committed the shedding of innocent blood, and this shedding of innocent blood caused God to tell Israel to do this to them. This is Chemosh. This is the god, this idol Chemosh. There is a fire pit right there on his lap. You see all the drummers here. And now you see the couple bringing their son to be offered to him. There's a fire here. What will the baby do once it's placed in the fire? Scream. What will the drummers do until the cry is done? Drum. So this is the kind of people that we're talking about, that Israel was commanded to eliminate. This was the culture that they had developed. It's like, shouldn't we just be friends? It's like, I'm just telling you this because this is like, shouldn't we just be friends with people who send suicide bombers to blow up people? I mean, it's like this, if you're wondering if this is new, it's not new. The idea of shedding innocent blood is not new. Even the mafia didn't believe in shedding innocent blood. You know, they wouldn't kill the children of, the mafia still doesn't kill children of people who do things. They just try and take the guy out, Pastor Shabelli can tell you all about that. Anyway, but these are the false gods of Canaan. This was the shedding of innocent blood. You can see this. This is like, this idea of killing children and getting rid of them is not a new one. It's not a new one. This idea of abortion, it's just they're not giving birth and killing them anymore, unless it's partial term or full term abortions, that they do that. But I mean, if you go back before John Wesley began preaching in England from 1720 to 1750, 4 out of 5 children did not live to the age of 5. 4 out of 5 children born at that period of time did not live to the age of 5. Many, more than half of those were left on the streets after they were given birth. It began the orphanage ministry that became later, George Mueller became a major player in the orphanage ministries. But orphanages didn't, and in the Roman times, girls were left on the hills of Rome to die, or they were rescued by the prostitute houses to be trained. So the idea of killing children, like we think, abortion, it's just like an antiseptic process and everything. People have been killing children and paying the penalty from God for it for a long time. And so this is one of the reasons that God said go in there. So there's a thread of faith all the way through it. We have the soldier Joshua. He's obedient. He has confidence in God. Remember the Rahab story. And God meets our measure of faith. There was just a measure of faith in her, and He fashions a life according to His purpose. Those are the thread of faith that you can look through, that God fashioned the life of Joshua according to His purpose. Joshua led this nation, and Rahab was fashioned according to His purpose, and God meets our measure of faith. And that's so however that happens, God meets it. And the great story is that they had confidence in God's plan, and the walls of Jericho fell, and she had confidence in God's promise. She tied the scarlet thread in her window, and Rahab is with us today in the Bible as part of Jesus Christ's family tree. So the just shall live by faith, and if we live by faith, we shall be justified and we shall triumph. So that's the message, And that's our class for tonight. Okay? All right, so you can think of Rahab and tie your own little red thing in there. And Rahab was the harlot. That's it. That's the story. So, all right, Lord, we just ask you to bless and keep us tonight, protect us as we go our way. Lord, we love you. We thank you for your blessing on our families, our church, our Bible college, our churches. And we thank you, Lord, for really quickening us in these things. Lord, guide us and lead us through this evening, through this week. In your name, amen. All right, thanks. Have a great night.